Right, everyone watching this who liked the Loch Dhu video, as in the world's worst whiskey video, you have only got yourselves to blame because we've gone and done it. You said that you wanted to try Loch Dhu just to see how bad it is. It's like looking at a car crash by the sounds of it. But anyway, this is the Loch Dhu bottle that was in the video, and as you can see, ooh, it is now empty. It is now empty because it has been sent to Scotland. The contents has been split up into 10 milliliter measures. You don't really need much more than 10 mil, seriously. And come on, into 10 mil measures, and they are now ready to ship from the shop. They're expensive. They're £15 for 10 millilitres, and we are literally making a couple of quid profit on each one of these. Like the cost of getting a bottle shipped up to Scotland, having a bottling facility, split it all out to drams, the labelling cost, the capsules, the seals, everything like that costs a boatload of money. So they're 15 quid. It's a lot of money to try the world's worst whiskey, but it's a good opportunity to try the world's worst whiskey because you don't have to go and spend a few hundred, £200-300 on a full bottle of it. Anyway, they're for sale now, but why is Loch Dhu Loch Dhu? What is it that kills Loch Dhu? What is it that makes it the worst whiskey in the world? Kind of. The whiskey's good. Mannochmore whiskey is incredible. It's all about the spirit caramel, and a boatload of spirit caramel was emptied into these casks, and then Loch Dhu was sort of finished in them. Now, I thought we'd use this as an opportunity to sort of do a bit of a dive into spirit caramel because it's getting a bit of controversy. Some of these things like chill filtering and all sorts of things are getting a bit of a bad rep, but again, is it easy to jump on the fence and berate these things? Like, is spirit caramel bad, for instance? Because it's actually got a really fascinating history. And since 1988, it's been the only additive that's been allowed into whiskey. But let's jump into this spirit caramel video. But before we do that, let's say thank you to our sponsor, which is me and the Mark Littler shop. Head over to the Mark Littler shop if you want to go and buy and sell any rare and old bottles of whiskey. We've got 500-600 bottles online now, worldwide shipping available. And without further ado, let's jump into spirit caramel because it goes all the way back to 1880. 1880 was when the first reference that we have to an additive being used to colour whiskey. Let's read it. Section 76 of the 1880 Spirit Act states that a distiller or rectifier may, blah, 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 add any sweetenings or colouring, blah, 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 to any spirits warehoused by him in an excise or customs warehouse. So basically in 1880, the Spirits Act, Section 76 basically said that if you've got whiskey in your warehouse, that you can colour as much as you want. And the 1888 Spirits Act, it was legislation that brought into, it kind of like regulated and standardised the production and sale of spirits in the UK. And it was also trying to sort of standardise quality and production methods as well. Now, we also had, and this is what's quite interesting, so you can kind of see we're going on a bit of a history curve here now. We also get, which is also important, and you'll see how this comes full circle with Loch Dhu, slightly later, so you get the first 1880 Spirits Act, but then you get in 1915 and 1916, you get the Immature Spirits Acts, which brought in to basically sort of like curtail production and consumption of whiskey during World War I. So in 1915, you get an act that sets out the 2-year minimum aging period for whiskey. And then in 1916, that is then extended to 3 years. So given that its roots go back all the way to 1880, colouring whiskey has had, it's as old and as long as the industry, basically. We've been colouring whiskey for a heck of a long time, maybe not to the extent of Loch Dhu, but we've also been doing it in other ways as well. So for instance, Paxarette, Pax. Now we covered this in our history of sherry casks, but Pax is basically ultra concentrated Pedro Ximenez or Oloroso sherry reduced down to a syrup. And this was essentially dolloped into a cask that was then pressure treated or steam treated or even just put in and rinsed around a bit to rejuvenate the casks. Now, this was also banned as an additive by the Scotch Whisky Association, but they allow the big dollops of E150, which is the spirit caramel colouring. But anyway, so you're not allowed to put a sherry concentrate into a cask because that's an additive, but you can put an additive that's got nothing to do with whiskey into a cask because that's fine. Anyway, right, what is this spirit caramel? Loch Dhu is famous for this incredibly dark whiskey, but what is this spirit caramel that gives it this colour? It's got a really fascinating history, and we've delved into a bit of the prehistory. So we've always used additives in whiskey, but let's look at the sort of like the more modern history in sort of like the 20th century. Now, It's always been widespread, but its use became more widespread because of two things that happened in the 1930s and the 1940s. In the 1930s, importantly, we have the Spanish Civil War, and in the 1940s, of course, we have World War II. Now, very, very, very simply put, sherry casks were the sole source of maturation, sole maturation vessels used for whiskey up until this point. The two wars made it very difficult to acquire sherry seasoned casks. So, guess what? We began to adopt. We tried to work a way around this problem of having a lack of supply of casks. So in 1944, yes, 1944, as late as that, we first see the use of bourbon casks used for maturing whiskey. So it wasn't until 1944, as a result of the shortage of sherry casks caused by those two wars, that bourbon casks came into production. Now, there was a problem though. There was a problem, and this problem was that the bourbon cask produced a much lighter coloured whiskey. And again, let's remember here, people, that depending on where you quote, 80 to 90% of Scotch whisky consumed around the world is blended whiskey. It's a generic wholesale product. And again, a lot of normal single malt distilleries, that's the right way around, isn't it? They still use E150 or spirit caramel to colour their whiskies to create, and this is important, a continuity of product. Because so many of us, if we were blind and drinking these whiskies, it wouldn't make a difference. But if you saw an incredibly dark whiskey like Loch Dhu, crazy dark, you would think that's going to have a load of cask influence and a load of aging behind it. But sometimes you might not have that. You might have a 35-year-old whiskey that's got almost no colour in it, but it tastes fantastic. The colour is basically a visual prompt. And this is why, once those bourbon casks had been introduced and being brought into use, you would start to see the use of something like spirit caramel to unify the colour across batches. Now, who can blame them? These are big commercial companies that want to make a consistent product so that when you go to the supermarket shelf, it looks the same and arguably tastes the same. And I think the visual look of the whiskey would help to create the taste of the whiskey in the same way that the packaging is important to changing the taste of it as well, because it changes your preconceptions about that whiskey. So another thing that actually, and that's very much related to this visual aesthetic is the transition to clear glass. Now, we did only really transition to clear glass through the 20th century, because otherwise we were in green glass or brown glass bottles. So this this transition to clear glass was a factor that expedited the use of spirit caramel. Now, and of course, like for all of you that are wondering what on earth spirit caramel is made by basically burning sugar. But essentially, when you get E150, which is the E number, which is the additive that's allowed to go into whiskey, it's basically a scientifically burned caramel. And I think I've got a note here to say that it's produced by heating sugar in the presence of tanning accelerators. So essentially it's burnt sugar that's scientifically controlled. And that is what happened with Loch Dhu. Now, as I understand it, and I don't really have any sort of written references to this, it's only anecdotal from speaking to lots of people in the industry. What happened with Loch Dhu was they took the whiskey, the casks were then emptied. The casks were then given a mighty healthy dollop of spirit caramel colouring. They were then filled in with the Mannochmore, left to mature for a short period of time, and then the result was this syrupy nonsense that you're going to see here. I've tried it. It smells good. The smell's all right. The nose is really good. Not really good. It's okay. You start having a sip. Oh man, and that's as soon as you get, it's that, no, and then it just descends. But of course, if you want to go and try it, and of course this Loch Dhu was produced at the time of like the peak of like Black Bowmore and these other sort of things, so it really is a fascinating time capsule of whiskey production. And again, apparently it was massively popular in Europe and in America. It's just, but anyway, it's there. If you've always wanted to try Loch Dhu, the drams are for sale now. They're £15 including shipping, and there you go. Go and enjoy the world's worst whiskey.